Hello and welcome to a new episode on the Wars Rebellion channel. I am your host, Niels Eichhorn, and I am joined today again by my colleague over in France. We're both very cold considering the temperatures outside, and we're just going through a nice big winter storm here, starting the new year in Europe. Wonderful times. So, Andrew Houck and I today have a very special guest that we have been looking forward to having on for a few weeks, almost months now. And finally, we're able to reach out, coordinate, and get this on the road. And I hope some of you know her and know her scholarship because she is a extraordinarily established historian. Elizabeth Leonard from, well, retired today, but formerly at Colby College. And she was the John J. and Cornelia V. Gibson Professor of History, has a PhD from the University of California, Riverside, and has a long list of books that she wrote, including Yankee Women, All the Daring of the Soldiers, Lincoln's Avengers, Lincoln's Forgotten Ally, which we're gonna talk about most today, and most recently, the biography of Benjamin Butler. Um, so first of all, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for taking time out of your busy protest schedule because you are very active these days, and in light of recent events, also very active. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. And you can see Mr. Lincoln behind me wearing his No Kings bandana. Um, when my kids were growing up, he often was not just a esteemed sculpture in the room, but he wore the boys' baseball caps and other things. But now he's in the protest with me wearing his No Kings bandana
Mm.
and my Statue of
Next to
Liberty,
the
of
statue,
course.
of course.
Yeah, I put them together. I used to have the Statue of Liberty in a separate part of the room, but I thought the two of them probably could use some solidarity, so I stuck her
Yeah.
over with him, and I think she's feeling better.
Well, I'm
I,
worried
I
that
I think the
Andrew will
French
get
would
me
be
Napoleon's third statue here soon.
no, no, but I think the association is good, and the French would
Hmm.
approve.
And actually, the picture, if I can tip this up, the picture above Lincoln's head, which you can't see very well, is a painting that was given to me by Mort Kunstler, the artist of Civil
Oh,
War stuff. And it is a picture of Lincoln, the only known picture of Lincoln and Holt together, and they are looking over the Lieber Code together. And he sent it to me when I won the Lincoln Prize for this book, and it was so very sweet. So this is sort of my power corner. I've got Lincoln, I've got Holt, I've got the statue, and other things too. That watching over me.
cool. That is cool. I
Yeah.
like Mort Kunstler's art.
Yeah,
Has a very vivid
I think he
style.
just died, didn't he? He may
Yeah,
have, maybe I hope
I
I'm not
think
burying
so.
him
yeah,
prematurely.
Within maybe a couple of years ago, or
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
not that long ago.
It's
So,
kind of loss. And in
yes.
well, we've already been chatting a little bit before we started the recording, so I think we want to start today a little bit with sort of your career because you have written quite a few books and sort of
a number of
towards
articles.
number of articles, very active in your active publishing career. But I think kind of which, let's start with which book are you most proud of? Which one is the ones that you kind of are like, ooh, this was such a, like looking back, this was the best books, the most fun books that I could write.
Well, I I I really did love writing the most recent book, the biography of Benjamin Butler, but I can't see how I would have written it without doing all the other ones beforehand. So I look back at Yankee Women, which is my first book, and of course, that came out in 1994, the same year I had my first child. So it was a very exhausting year. But I look back at it now and I think, oh man, it's a dissertation, to me. I think, oh,
Mm,
I grew so much as a scholar
mm,
and as a writer and as a researcher, between that, and yet I'm still very proud of that. I think that was a great first book, but it really is a first book, and it feels like that. And conversely, my Butler book feels like it's the culmination of my career, and it was particularly fun, and interesting because he was a graduate of Colby College when it was Waterville College. So it was not just a culmination of my scholarly career, but it had so much connection to all my years at Colby, and it was rooted in a or it and a big influence on why I took on the book, although not the only reason, but that my predecessor in my position at Colby had written this amazing article about Benjamin Butler back in 1964, and I and that's actually where the subtitle of the book comes from, A Noisy, Fearless Life, because this my predecessor had said he was a noisy, fearless person, and I thought, I want that on my tombstone, that she was noisy and fearless. So, anyway, so that was a really fun book. And, they've all had their own
mm.
interesting features.
And it seemed like you kind of were building on each other, like
Very
that sort
much
of
so.
some books informed the next one that was coming, and your last two were biographical more so than kind of more just sort of a history of like events or people, but it
Yep.
really much about a person. So
Yes.
what how do you feel about that? Was that something that you consciously wanted to do, that towards the end of your career you wanted to do more biography, or was this something where you kind of felt like I just feel like I want to study more of a person over their lifetime? Like, just curious what.
Well, the Joseph Holt biography um, came sort of in the sort of middle or sort of
Mm,
late middle part of my career. And I really felt like he had been dogging me. He actually appears in Yankee Women,
mm,
and he just kept and then he appeared later, in Lincoln's Avengers. He was an important figure, and I just felt like I want to know more about this
mm,
person as I got, although he annoyed me a lot, but I wanted to know more about him, and I felt like I knew more about him than so many people, than really most people in our field. Um, and most people even in Kentucky. So that seemed very logical that I would write his biography. And I will say, having written other things before that, especially the first two books, but even Lincoln's Adventures. But there's something very nice about a biographical narrative arc. You start at the beginning, you do the life, and then they die, and it's just very easy, and it all holds together in a certain kind of way. So I like that. There is actually a book that is less known. I'm reaching for it. I'm sorry, but I don't know if you've seen this book,
mm,
Slave Hold. But this came between my Holt biography and the Butler biography, and that was still more Holt. It's like, oh my God, I can't leave this man behind. But the Butler biography, then I really had enjoyed doing the Holt biography, and I enjoyed it, and I thought I was good at working with very difficult characters.
mm.
So I thought Butler is another
Butler.
difficult character. And there's a lot of nasty things said about him, as with Holt. There's a
Mm,
lot of stuff you don't know if it's true. You really have to dig around. You don't know if you're going to like him. I mean, I always said
mm.
I really respected Joseph Holt, and I really respect Benjamin Butler. And thank goodness I didn't have to live with either of them in real life. I think they would have been very difficult companions. But I admire them. I liked, and I thought I was good on the Holt biography. So I thought, well, and here Butler, he's been also lurking around me all my career. I maybe should, pursue it. So I did. But it wasn't like I
So,
thought, oh, biography's going to be fun. It was more like I'm the person to do the stories of these people.
so are there particular challenges when you go from writing a more traditional history to writing a biography?
I think
Rather,
yes,
what are the
there are. I remember early on, probably right in writing the Holt biography, I read a great article that said it was just about the work of writing biography. And the thesis of this article was that all biography is autobiography, and all
challenges?
autobiography is biography, which I thought was so true. Like it's very easy to pour yourself into, you shape their life according to your values. Or if you wrote your own story, you're going to pick and choose, to shape your life for another reader. So there is the whole issue of, am I being true to this person, or am I picking the things that are meaningful to me, but maybe really I should talk about these other things too. And then there's stuff, particularly I would say in the Holt story, there was some very personal stuff that I encountered that I really didn't know what to do with.
Mm.
And I don't know if I don't think I said this anywhere in the book itself, but I know that I've told people this before. I found some archival materials in the Library of Congress that were extremely personal. And and after I'd read through these materials, personal and private and a little bit scandalous, I would say, but about his personal life. And I read through the materials, and then at the bottom of this pile of materials, this is such a historian's story. I found a note in his handwriting saying, if I die before these documents are found, they should be burned. But they were not burned. And there they were in the Library of Congress. And I had read the whole stack of them. And I thought, should I include them? Should I not include them? And in the end, I didn't include the more just sort of questionably personal stuff, because I thought it actually doesn't change the story about
Mm.
him. It's not relevant here. Um, but that was a tough struggle, and I think you're constantly dealing with that kind of thing. Is it important to include this? Should I not include it? And the other thing is, I would say Laurel Ulrich, when she wrote her great book, A Midwife's Tale. I don't know if you've seen the film where she's interviewed about writing that book, but in that film, the documentary, she talks about how when you in learning about Martha Ballard, she discovered that there were like 30 years worth of diaries of everyday entries by Martha Ballard. Very short, like weather clear, delivered 3 children, the crops are in. Or, but it's 30 years of these things, and then people coming in and out of the diaries. And she said, when you start doing the research on a biography, it's like walking into a room full of people, and you don't know which people you should know. Who are you supposed to
Mm.
know? Who are you supposed to introduce yourself to? Are they important? Are they not important? Are they going to prove to be important later? And it's just chaos. And then you have to keep sort of staying at the party and staying and going back to the party, and meeting
Yeah.
people in other settings to decide. So trying to
Mm.
take this chaos, and turn it into something that has some kind of structure, that's a challenge. I mean, that's true of all history, I guess, but it seems
So,
somehow
so
particularly
what
true.
do you do if, say, in the archives, you've got a gap? How do you
I,
deal with gaps?
I have there's always gaps, as you know, and I think the thing is to acknowledge there's a gap and to understand that a gap is not nothing. A gap is different from nothing. A gap is
Yeah.
a gap. Why is there a gap? What does the gap itself mean? What thing is that representing? But it's a challenge, and I have in a different book that I did, my Men of Color to Arms book, when I launched into that book, I wanted to find these black soldiers saying certain things, and they didn't say anything like what I thought they would say. And I was like, oh man, I wanted them to say this thing, but they were saying these other things. And, but you have to, if you're honest, you just have to say,
Let
that's what the record says, and
yeah,
oh
you
well.
let the sources speak.
Exactly. Yeah. As best you can interpret what they say. And you, of course, cross reference constantly. You know, we were talking before you started recording about AI, and I was thinking of an article I read years ago in the Chronicle of Higher Education. And the article, which was very good then, was called Teaching in the Time of Google. And I don't know if you've read it, but it was about the dangers of outsourcing all of our capacity for creating stories out of the record, out of our research. We just outsource that to Google. It does the work for us. I mean, that's what the article was saying at the time. And I think that's the one of the great skills of historians is we know how to we go out there and we take all the pieces. We're like jigsaw puzzle people. I love jigsaw puzzles, and we're just putting we may not know what the picture is, but we're out
Hmm.
there and we're taking all the pieces and trying to put them together.
Yeah.
And not
It's
the
sort of like
broken
the
pieces.
reverse jigsaw, right? Like we're it's a blank blank
Yeah, you
one,
don't
and we
always know
can.
what the picture is going to be. And frankly, with Butler, my biggest fear in starting that biography, because it came out in 2022, so our current leader of the regime, I'm sorry, the current person occupying the Oval Office was very much on the scene, and I worried that there were superficial aspects of Butler that I thought if I get to know him better, maybe he's going to turn out to be this guy.
Hmm.
What will I do if I really, really don't like him? You know, fortunately, that didn't happen. But
Yeah.
that's
Oof.
another thing with biography. Like, what if I don't like this guy? This person, I don't like them. Or what if I like them too much and can't see their failings?
I
Yeah, that's
think
hard.
we'll get to that with Holt and
Yeah.
Johnson a good few moments in a
Uh.
little while.
Mm, mm,
But sort of piggybacking off of what Andrew already asked and what you said, I will say that having read and interviewed people who have written on Van Landingham as sort of the trial, having interviewed Marvel on the Fitzjohn Porter trial, and I was going into that chapter of yours like really looking forward to like, oh, how is she going to tell the details of that story? And then you just very quickly went over these, and I was like, oh man, I'd like to see so much more.
Yeah.
I mean, I
That's
totally
another
got what you were
choice, of
doing,
course.
you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another choice, I guess. Like, what do I have the capacity to tell
Right.
about? What do I have the skills
Right.
to really
mm,
explain? Um, and and there's also the editorial work that gets done outside
Hmm.
of what the historian is doing, where I mean, the Holt book, for example, and also to a lesser extent the Butler book, but the Holt book certainly, I remember being told, you got to cut like this out, you got to cut that out, and you got to,
Hmm.
because it's too much and it's too long and it's blah, and it's nice to get to a point in your career where you can say no when the editor says do
mm.
this thing, and you can go, I don't know, no, we're leaving that in,
Hmm.
Well,
which,
Yeah.
but
thinking about that question about the court martials and courts martial, court martial,
yes, courts martial.
courts martial. Um, it would have been difficult to get into the detail without making it almost a second, the central point of the book.
Yeah.
It seemed.
And I have to say the book is far enough in my rearview mirror now that I can't remember all of the reasons why I made the kinds of choices I made myself, but there may be it may be the case too that there were other people working on those
Hmm.
stories that I felt, that person is going to do a better job
Well,
than I can do, and
it was a
I can
question.
talk about this stuff.
There was a question that I had quite a bit when I was reading the Butler biography.
Yes.
I just wanted more detail for certain things, but there was no way you could have kept it, to 220 pages or whatever it is, because Butler, there are so many life experiences. He did
Hmm.
so many things. I mean,
And isn't it amazing that I remember, so the book came out in 2022, and I would say most of 2023, I was giving talks about it, here and
mm,
there. I gave a lot of talks that year.
It's-
And I would say that one of the most frequent comments I got from people was, I had no idea he did anything after the war. Let alone anything
Mm.
before the war, but
Mm.
anything after the war. It's like they knew him as this, and I don't like this characterization, but this sort of bumbling, brash general during the war who did a couple of good things, and then they don't
Being
know
mean to
anything else. And you
Confederates.
think the great bulk of his life,
Mhm.
it's like 30 years after the war, that he goes on to do a lot of things. But yeah, that was interesting to me that you
But
couldn't
it's
Mm.
possibly tell every story.
but it
Well,
seems that's in
and
general a problem of this
yeah,
period, right? That people are like, oh, they're focusing on these 4 years of people's lives, whether
Right.
that's any
mm,
politician or military leader, and forgets that there's the 60, 70 more years that
Yes.
are
And
going
that they
on.
have lives beyond the battlefront or
Right.
beyond the White House. I mean, that was a struggle with Holden, as I said, less so with the Butler's book, maybe because, I was so far along, but so I wasn't challenged in the same way. But this idea, well, there's just too much personal stuff in here. And I'm like,
Mm.
no, his life it's a life. It's,
Mhm.
yes, his focus is here in his work, but
mm,
there's no question that the other people in his life have an
Mhm.
impact on his life, yeah, and the people he loves are going to affect. I mean, don't we live that way? I mean, he's a human
mm,
being, you know. So it is interesting
yeah.
to see people distilled down to just a very traditional kind of biography. He's just, the work with nothing else around him, or just a focus on the Civil War years, or whatever.
Yeah, and I felt
But
that
with
that. Sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
sorry.
I've been
Well, I was
asking
gonna say
questions.
with Holt, one of the things that I noticed is you kind of have the same. You have a similar origin story with Lincoln and with Andrew Johnson, and probably I'm guessing with Jefferson Davis as well, where they come into their own through their various either through family wealth or pulling themselves up by their bootstraps like Johnson and Lincoln, but coming into their own politically in the 1830s. So I wonder how many other people whose war year life we focus on
Yeah,
um, had similar interesting origin stories.
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. And also then the way what happens in the war sort of seems to, or tip that story,
Yeah,
like jerk that story around, certainly in Holt's case.
yeah.
That happens in Butler too, I would say, for at least the people I
Well, but it
know
happens with
best.
Andrew Johnson as well.
Yeah, he's an interesting character. I used to think he was the worst president ever.
Me too.
He has been bumped up the ladder as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
now
So
you're
Niels,
kind
I
of like,
interrupted you. I'm sorry.
now it's like, oh man, there was this one question I still wanted to ask where you're like, oh, let's not go there.
Which question is that?
Because I kind of like because it was Hold, and I kind of was Hold. We have Butler. Oh, sorry, we have Buchanan at the start, and he's sort of
Yeah,
secretary. Oh, he starts in the patent office. He works at the post office. He's Secretary of War eventually, and sort of the last part of Buchanan's administration. Then he works for Johnson after the war. The whole
right.
chaos there, but it's sort of like interesting when you think of it. Lincoln is bookended by two presidents who are ranked consistently in the bottom
That's a good point.
five, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of like when I read through your chapter of Holt working in the Buchanan administration, one of the things that I walked away with was that we always blame Buchanan for like failing to do something.
Yeah.
But it felt like you're saying no, that we can't blame Buchanan for all of this. Holt and Buchanan are doing what is within their limits doable, but
Yeah.
there's just not a lot that he can do either. So it felt a little bit like I don't want to say vindicating Buchanan, but it felt a little like let's not be so superficially critical of Buchanan.
Right. I think that's probably, an accurate interpretation. Not so much maybe vindicating him, but forgiving him, or at least understanding,
Hmm.
giving him a little room to breathe. I
Yeah.
think it is such a tendency, probably for all of us, but hopefully less so for a lot of historians, but certainly for regular non-historian folks, to say they should have done X, you know? And I don't know.
Hmm.
It's hard to do it if you don't, if, you know, we have to try to put ourselves back in
Hmm.
their setting. In the book that I wrote, all, Men of Color to Arms, I'm looking up at my bookshelf to see the title. One of the things I do there is talk about the guy who created Carlisle Indian School, and whose name escapes me now. But anyway, um, and the Indian schools, I know they did terrible things. They did terrible things. They took the kids from their tribes and they brought them to these schools and they forced them to learn English and they forced them to become Christians and they did, terrible things, took them away from their families. Many of them died of terrible diseases and so on. And I recognize all of that. But I took some serious flack for trying to say the person who founded this school believed that Native people had two options: either go become civilized or be exterminated, because that's what was going to happen otherwise. And so, in his mind, whatever you
Hmm.
think of it now, and whatever you think he should have thought, in
Hmm.
his mind, he thought this is the better option. Is
Right.
that we give them a way to survive.
Hmm.
Of course, it looks terrible to us now, and I'm not saying it was the right choice. And if it's like saying, well, there's so much counterfactual history that one could do. They should have done this. Oh, well, okay,
Hmm.
but they didn't, and the conditions were such that, and people were trying to do their best, and they screwed up, or they did things that later on. I mean, I think now, and then I will shut up. But I think the things we do now, what will they say in the future? That we should have been doing X, and yeah, but sometimes we can see that and sometimes we can't. And that's not to forgive our mistakes, but to just say, I don't know, have a little grace, I guess. Offer a
I didn't,
little grace.
I didn't realize it was founded so late.
Yes,
18,
1870.
1879.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
With
After he
Henry
had
Pratt.
worked at Hampton, at the Hampton School. So, um, that's kind of interesting because his first experience was with blacks at Hampton, where Butler was, and then he went on to found the Indian School. Yeah, Carlisle Indian School.
Well, I guess that leaves over for Andrew for a good opportunity, right? We give more grace to Johnson too.
Oh, I struggle with that. But yeah,
Yeah.
he had his psychology for sure and his own background for sure. But
Well, and then the two Johnsons. You have the wartime Johnson, then you have President Johnson, who were,
yes, I think he maxed out as military governor,
yeah,
in terms, yeah,
Hmm.
definitely.
and yeah,
1864 was his
yeah,
peak.
yeah, yeah, and then
So,
he just really, I think, yeah, well, I don't know. You have a question, so
well, yeah. Well, Niels was saying that Holt's career was, bookended. uh, Buchanan and
Johnson,
Grant were
Lincoln's
his,
career, yeah,
yeah. So his career as judge advocate general. So that was from Lincoln through Grant.
yeah, through part of Grant because he retired, I think, in 75.
70, yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah, so to,
almost,
almost
yeah,
to the end of
almost
Grant's
all of it,
second term.
right.
Yeah. So um, how how did he change politically, um, given the shifting tides of those very different presidencies?
Yeah. So how did Holt change politically? Well, I think in his
Did he change? I
time,
mean,
yes, definitely. I would say he definitely changed both politically and personally, or parts of his personality, as with so many of us, became more and more exaggerated, in his
um,
later years. But I would say with Buchanan, he was um, he was fundamentally a unionist, but he was also a let us placate the South Southerner. You know, let's hold it together if we possibly can. And of course, he had grown up with slaves and with slavery as being, you know, a familiar and comfortable system for him and his family. And so he hoped, I think, initially to just let's hold it together. But I think Holt was really genuinely shocked in December of 60 to see what white Southerners were, slaveholders, were willing to do to the Union to protect the institution and to see the government start to fall apart the way it did. So to see people leaving Buchanan's administration was very shocking to him. And I think that's where he starts to really make a turn towards, well, if you're, I mean, if you're going to do that, then, you know, no, now we're just all about union. Um, and so I think we see him shift. And then in Lincoln's time, he becomes increasingly an advocate of what Lincoln believed, and including around black soldiers, including around emancipation, and so on. And for him, as with for Butler, I would say nothing is more, nothing has more of an impact in terms of hardening his views around the need for emancipation and black civil rights, at least, um, than their military service and what they're willing to sacrifice with no guarantees that anything good will come of it, you know. Um, and then I think when Lincoln dies, that's another inflection point for him because here he had worked so hard, as so many had, to keep this man alive, to, and I often have used this phrase, to stick the landing of Union victory, to make it mean something. And it looks very quickly, within a few weeks after Lincoln, first of all, Lincoln's dead, which is crushing. And then to see that Johnson, from his perspective at least, is giving it all away, like is bowing down before the slaveholder, is so enjoying his power to draw in the begging of the, you know, the people who had kept him down as a young person. This is how I see it, and
That's
I'm
a,
not a Johnson scholar, but it always felt to me like
that's a,
he just had
within
been,
6 weeks.
yeah, 6 weeks. He's like, okay, well, never mind. You know, he's talking tough for like 2 weeks, and then suddenly he's giving it all away. And I think for Holt, with his already crotchety personality, his family having all except this one dear aunt, you know, Aunt Mary or Mary Ann, you know, who stood by him till she finally died. It just felt like everything, you know, he had lost everything and nothing was going to, everything he'd fought for and the person he had come to love and revere, Abraham Lincoln, was dead. And now Johnson giving away the farm. He was so embittered. And I think he never recovered from that bitterness. And you see it in his, I think one of the questions you had asked me was about the way he handled the trial of the assassins and how he made some really not very good judgment calls, you know, clearly, like he's paying witnesses and he's listening to people who are lying, but he's just beyond, you know, reason in some sense, I think. And so angry. I think he was someone who had a towering temper to begin with, and I think he lost it, you know, he really lost it in some sense. And this, but I can understand, I think, his sense of what did we just do this all for? You know, and it's all, we're losing everything. And that would be very painful. I mean, yeah. So
It,
that's how I see him sort of changing
mm,
over time. And it's kind of just fading into the end of his life, like retreating into his home, trying to rebuild relations with some of his family members, um, tending his garden, and just feeling
Didn't he
dark
help
and
to try?
lonely.
Didn't he try
Pardon?
to help mediate or didn't he help mediate the Tilden Hayes compromise?
I don't remember.
Hmm.
Could be. I don't remember that,
Hmm.
but yeah.
Well, I mean,
I was going to go back to your kind of because we're dealing with sort of the intellectual growth here, and one of the parts that was sort of fascinating, and I think also kind of that kind of speaks to the larger question that Andrew raises with sort of the growth of him, right? So the kind of you have passages there where he is very critical of Black Republicans. Very much sort of the almost stereotypical Southerner and sort of the
Absolutely.
honor that it's very important to be honorable and that he leaves college simply over an accusation over questioning his honor. Like it was
Yeah.
crazy in the way,
Right.
and I kind of wonder of like what where we talk about like his deep animosity sort of these immediate secession is it the sense of honors that he feels like where he has a legal career is it the interpretation that he takes towards the Constitution? I mean, he's not a constitutional lawyer, right? So it's sort of like like where do you see some of this sort of unionism kind of getting born? Tougher question, sorry.
Well, it's a tough question, but I'm thinking it's also the question almost reflects. It makes me think about Gary Gallagher's book about union and how it is hard for us today to understand that concept and what it meant in the hearts of many people in that time. So now it's union, yeah, blah blah blah. We say the Pledge of Allegiance, and we don't even remember. We just sort of say it, and meanwhile we're checking our phones, and it's just that sense of intense commitment to an idea of a nation, especially a young nation that you grew up as it was growing up, kind of
Mm,
thing. That it's as old as you are, not much older than you are, kind of thing. I think it's hard for us to understand that, and certainly not everybody felt that. But I think Holt really did have those two forces in play. This sense of profound unionism, but also he did think of himself as a Southerner, and he was a slaveholder, and maybe we just can't even really understand what his family relationships, what role they may have played in
hmm.
his shift as well. I mean, what does it mean when you watch your family all turning in a certain direction and doing but you thought you were a different kind of family?
mm,
But now everybody's like becoming, no, we're going to leave the union, and we're going to go fight to
mm,
maintain our slaves. And I don't think we can ever. I that was one document. I think that I wrote about this actually in an article for the Kentucky Register, Historical Register, that I had hoped to find the document where he explains the turn. What was it? And it's the doc that talk about a gap. There's
mm,
no, he never left, he didn't leave a diary, he
mm,
didn't leave a journal. We have many, many, many letters and a lot of his writing, but nothing where he sits down and says, this is why I accepted, or I took this job because I decided. So you just have to kind of feel your way to it. And it could be, I mean, he had been very close to his brother Robert, but his brother Robert became this sort of rabid um, slaveholding white nationalist, and maybe that was repulsive in some
He was
way.
the doctor, correct?
No, the doctor was Richard, and Richard died.
Ah,
He was, what did Robert do? He was not a doctor.
Well,
I can't.
he was the one that went down to Vicksburg, right? And
Yes, he
did
went down to
some
Vicksburg, and yes, yeah, yeah,
he tried legal, but what didn't that didn't work out for him.
yes.
Yeah.
And he and
okay.
Holt had, I mean, he wrote Holt these horrible letters, and just, you know, who knows, like how we make our decisions, you know.
Mm.
But but I do think that there was this sense of, these two forces, and when white Southerners, including his own families, decided to go in this one direction, he's like, no, no, we're not doing that. Yeah. And who knows what
Yeah, so
influence his wife had on him too. I don't know.
hmm.
Andrew,
Well,
you go ahead.
well, it goes back to the question that I asked earlier about coming to a political age in the age of Jackson. So in the 1830s, you've got nullification, and
Yeah.
that really hardened a certain part of the population.
Yeah. Yeah. And your sense of your connection to a party, which in the Butler book is, that's another place where
Yeah,
people have so much to say about Butler and his party flip-flopping. And
Breckenridge to
yeah,
Lincoln.
and I think, I that's if you had a chance to read that book, people who've read it will see I disagree with the view that he was without a party. I mean that he was without a political position. It always
Mm.
annoys me when people say, "Oh, he was such a flip-flopper," because he would say, "No, yeah, the parties kept moving around and I just sort of stayed here and looked for the party that, reflected my views and moved around." Maybe that's self-serving, but I bought it.
Well, you sell it pretty well too.
Well,
But but I think that's sort of the kind of challenge of like where or it's sort of what makes it so much harder for us as historians to explain the past to the modern generation that people might be consistent in their personal ideology, but then find move between parties to kind of find the place where they feel most comfortable. And
absolutely.
like especially in a more very partisan world that we live in today, that's hard to grasp for people of like how can you go to the other party because well maybe because that party represents better what I stand for.
Yeah. You would think that people today, particularly with respect to the Republican Party, at least people of a certain age, would understand it better than
Mm.
others. That, okay, this is not the party of Lincoln. It's not even the party of Barry Goldwater, for God's sake. It is a different party. Like it or hate it, but it is not the same party. So you should be able to understand that somebody who believed the Republican Party stood for this, or the Democratic Party. It's not the party of secession anymore. It is the party,
Right.
and it's maybe not the party of FDR anymore, although maybe it's trying to be the party of FDR again or whatever. But these parties change. And if you have a consistent set of values, you'd think, oh, well, why is it so weird? But yeah, we're so obsessed with loyalty, I guess. Loyalty, I don't know. It's a curious thing, actually, today. Because if you're loyal to a label more than you are to what's behind that
Yeah.
label, that seems pretty strange to me. But
Well, it's
that's,
so completely different from the second party, third party system
yeah.
in the 19th century. I mean, where you have these parties that are changing names, they're changing
Yeah.
slight. Yeah. So yeah, well, people can actually
Yeah.
find some party that fits their their own beliefs.
Yeah. And I think maybe in the 19th century, in a way that maybe we don't have so much anymore, there were other ways you could identify, like people were identified with a party, but they were also identified with a union, or they were identified with a voluntary association that had some punch to it. And nowadays, like the unions, what unions are, the unions have faded, and many churches, many great, churches of long standing and size and history have faded away to be replaced by these other, but kinds of institutions that I think people used to also identify with that sort of completed their sense of themselves. A lot of that is faded. So maybe that's why people cling so much to certain labels. Is at least I know I belong to this club. I don't know what other clubs I
Yeah.
belong to, but I know I belong to that club. And those are my people.
Well, and even in the late 19th century, where you had the DAR and you had the UDC and you had the veterans organizations and you had
Right.
the Temperance League and you had
Right. Right.
And it seems like you like to
um,
pick characters who don't like to belong to clubs.
well,
No,
Because
they
Holt
really
and
they're
Butler
both
did
of them.
not really fit in anywhere.
No, and Holt and Butler both lived on New Jersey Avenue in Washington, which is now
Hmm.
they're both of their houses are, they're gone. But I also that was always another gap that I wished I could have filled, but I
Hmm.
couldn't for all my research. Did they chat over the garden fence? Did they certainly knew each other. There's no way they wouldn't have known each other. They would have crossed
Hmm.
paths certainly in the assassination trials and stuff. And I thought, oh, you both lived on, New Jersey Avenue, right near the Capitol. Did you talk to each other? Did you not like each other? Maybe they didn't like each other. Maybe they were both too irascible. I don't know, but I wished I could have found evidence of their conversations because I think those would have been fascinating to see.
personally, it seems like Holt was a pretty hard guy to get along with.
Oh, I'm sure he was. Yes, he was. Although he was, he also there's evidence, and I think I draw it out maybe more towards the end of the book that, like Butler, who was also challenging, very, very loved by the people who loved him. And the story that you may remember from the preface, which I was looking over, I was thinking, oh, I've known Joseph Holt for so many years. But Mary Walker, who, he was the person who deprived her of her medical career after the Civil War. She was the woman doctor who, after the Civil War, wanted to continue in military service as a doctor. And he said, no, let's give her the Medal of Honor instead.
Hmm.
And so she was the first woman ever to receive the Medal of Honor. And that was because of Joseph Holt as the Judge Advocate General saying there's no precedent for a woman be doctor in the Army Medical Service. And so I really was ticked at him about this for many years. And then I found letters from her to Holt in the 1890s, thanking him for the fruit he had sent her, thanking him for lending her some money, saying it was so good to see you in the street the other day. And they were very congenial. And I thought, oh my God, she forgave
Well,
him. I should forgive too.
didn't he address her as doctor as well?
Yeah, yeah. Well, he didn't. And she corrected him.
Hmm.
Oh,
Yeah. She said, please call me Dr. Mary Walker. Yeah, he used to call her Mrs. Walker. But I think people did love him who loved him. And maybe that's always true. I mean, maybe horrible people get loved by somebody, but I don't think he was horrible. I just think he would have been very, very difficult to, get along with.
hmm.
But he
You,
had very loyal friends over many years as well.
There was something like worth talking about, I think, because and I didn't put it in the list of topics for us, but you weave in, especially I think it's in the last two chapters, maybe three chapters, those. But I guess I should go back first because he's married twice, never
yeah.
has children, and after his second wife dies, never remarries. But in the course of the Civil War, and you tease that out in quite some detail, he has women writing to him, and he gets into correspondences with these women, and it's sort of like kind of just going through the motion a little bit. Like, what was your like? Why did you like? Was it something you wanted to include in that detail? Was it something that was just like because it was so much time he spent on it that that needed to be in there, spoke so much to his character? Like,
I
or
thought it
how do you
spoke.
feel like was he just like why was he engaging with them?
I think he loved women. And I think he loved being loved by women or having women in his environment. I don't think he was someone who did well as a spouse, particularly, certainly not in any way we would think of that today. I mean, I think both of his wives spoke often of his absence and, where are you? And I miss you and you're never here. And but I do think he liked that um, interaction. I think that he may well have had some romantic relationships. Um, and I do think that helps to fill out his character and maybe soften him a little bit. He's not all prickly, he's not hateful. I mean, people love him. I guess I felt, you know, some obligation to show that people did love him. If you think he's just horrible, he's not, or he's just stern all the time. And the picture, of course, on the cover of the book, I mean, this is just so classic. He's just
Hmm.
so stern looking. And that's
He
how
looks like
people
one of the
imagined him.
well, he
Pardon?
looks like one of the Muppets, the the Eagle Man.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Although, the picture inside, the portrait of him, which I had never seen until I met the family members,
Mm.
you know, and I
Mhm.
had read somebody saying the dashing Joseph Holt, and I was like, dashing? God, he just looks so crabby all the time. But then I saw that picture and I thought, oh, okay, maybe he was considered dashing. But I think it softened him to talk about that a lot. But then there was a point at which I felt like I don't need to. It just felt. I mean, I think I have often said that historians are voyeurs of the past,
Hmm.
and we're very prurient. Is that the right word? I mean, I love learning about people's lives, and it's fascinating to me. But I also felt like I how much should I share, or what really contributes to telling the big story that I'm trying to tell? Do I include it? Do I not include it? I don't know.
Well, it's like the stack of really intimate letters that you're talking
Yes.
about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Include
I
some,
think
but
he
not.
liked younger women, particularly young, pretty women, which is,
But if he
seems to
just
be not an
corresponds
uncommon.
with them, he doesn't know what they look like.
Well, I think he knew
Or did
some
they
of
what they
them
pick? Oh,
personally.
okay.
I think he knew some of them personally. But I think he also was very much, I don't know, but I have in the course of my very long life, writing for me is a very intimate thing.
Hmm.
And it's a way that I feel like I connect with people that maybe I'm more awkward in person than I am when I can sit down and think things out and write them out. I have a correspondence with a friend, and when we spend time together, and this is a friend of many years, when we spend time together, we start getting on each other's nerves pretty darn fast because we just have different way, not because we don't like each other. We just have different edges. And
Hmm.
but we have a daily correspondence that is
Hmm.
robust and warm and supportive and informational, and just like
Hmm.
my best friend. And and he was very much a writer, as was Butler. And I think just for me personally as a biographer, I'm sure that's part of the draw for me, is that they were great minds, great writers, and I loved reading their stuff. And I could read their stuff. There's nothing like trying to do the biography of Oliver Otis Howard. I don't know if you've ever seen his handwriting, or Dorothea Dix. Oh my God, I don't know how anybody ever wrote her biography because her
Did
handwriting is
Howard lose his
impossible.
dominant arm?
He did. Yeah. And
So he had to
his,
learn. He had to learn how to write
yes.
with his left hand.
Yeah, I can't remember which one it was. Probably he lost his right and had to learn to write with his left. But yeah, it's impossible to
Oof.
read. And Dorothea
Ah.
Dix, I saw some of her writing once, and I thought, well, I will never be writing her biography because I can't read it. And Holt, was easy to read, and Butler was easy to read.
That reminds me, like
Hmm.
one of the first conferences I went to, Mark Neely said, like, no one can read William Henry Stewart's right handwriting.
Oh, that's interesting. And
I,
frankly, students today,
They wouldn't be
What's going to
able
happen
to.
to our field? They can't read any cursive. I mean,
No.
I had students come to me and say, I can't read, and this is back in the 2010s, I can't read your notes on my paper. Could you
Mm.
type them for me? Like, no. If you can't read cursive,
I'm
that's
sorry.
that's a problem. Yeah, that's like
So,
being semi-illiterate in my,
yeah.
view. But it certainly means you're not going back and reading 19th century documents, and they
Mm,
can be transcribed, but you still have to read the document because
yeah.
the transcription isn't always right.
It reminds me of when I was working on my first thesis that I didn't finish on Third Republic France and anti-clericalism. Um, the penmanship just beautiful
Oh,
in cursive, of course, just
yeah, right.
fantastic.
Yeah,
1870s, 1880s, 1890s, just fantastic. You know, I
yeah,
had to figure out what they were saying because I didn't.
right,
My French
right.
wasn't, but it got better. But I could read it perfectly. There was no
Yeah,
problem at all.
yeah. Such
Yeah,
a
talk to
such a
me.
gift.
I hate that old 18th century German handwriting. Oh, good
Oh.
God.
Uh,
And I will
Like,
say the invention of the typewriter is a good thing. I know that later in Butler's life, he used the typewriter a lot, or his clerk did, and some of his
mm,
outgoing letters and stuff, I could get through them a lot faster because
mm,
they were in typescript, and I was grateful for that at the end of his life. But I mean, if you're reading thousands and thousands and thousands of letters, it's nice when some of them are pretty readable. But I knew that they were his typed ones, not some
mm.
transcriber, you know, taking what he had said.
Well, I think that sort of it. It was a question that I had in my mind earlier, but it's worth now maybe asking and talking a little about it because I mean it's something that I dealt with and you deal with and Andrew deals with, and anytime we deal with individuals on a more intimate basis, we have this issue, and it was sort of something that came up. I think it was my first conference, Schaefer in DC, and I was in a panel on Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon era foreign policy. And these guys had tapes, right? And for
Oh
your
yeah.
research, you're sitting in a dark room and you're listening to the cabinet discussing. And one of the persons asked, and I think it was a brilliant question these days, how involved, how invested, how personally connected do you become? Right?
Mm,
By constantly being so deep in these people's
right.
minds, involved in their kind of personal affairs.
Right. Well, I think you do become attached. I think it's impossible to not become
Hmm.
somehow attached to them and perhaps um, defensive of them,
Hmm.
on their behalf because you have spent all this time with them, and um, but that makes it even more important to acknowledge that right up front, like
yeah.
a lot of people hate this guy. I got to tell you, I don't hate him, so
Hmm.
be forewarned. I don't hate him, or this is how I feel because I think it's just good to come clean about that. But you do become invested. I actually thought you were going to take that question in a different direction, which
Please.
is, well, I thought you were going to say, we have all the 19th century and earlier writing, and then in the 20th century we get tapes, and now we're dealing like what are historians of the future going to use for their documents of our
Mm.
time? That's where I thought you were going, but
I don't worry about that because
oh,
I'm
thank
not going to
God
be
I
around
don't
for
have to worry about
that.
it. Yeah, I just don't even know like emails and what even it's all
Tweets.
so ephemeral. It's
Social media,
just
yeah.
like
Yeah.
social media and I was thinking recently about how I used to, when my students, when I was still teaching early on, I would say in my teaching career, I said, photographs are so good because they really, it's a photograph. And thank goodness we
Hmm.
had photography because we could see what happened,
Hmm.
and now it's like with Photoshop, even in the course of my career,
Hmm.
well, Photoshop, who knows
Right.
if and now in our current environment, of course, one of my greatest fears is how do we even know what truth is? I'm preparing a letter to be delivered to our main senator's offices in about a week, which is very timely. We've been planning this for a few weeks now, but it's about the way this current administration is really quite comfortable with killing people or letting people die. That's my position, whatever. And so I was like, I was thinking, well, I can't just say that. I want to say I hold them responsible for deaths in this category, the boat strikes,
Hmm.
for example,
Yeah.
and for the ending of USAID. And, there, this many people died because of that. But then I wanted to document
Hmm.
those things. Like, I wanted to find evidence because I don't want to make statements as a historian, as a scholar,
Hmm.
without having, and I'll tell you, it was challenging. Can I trust this source? Can I not trust this source?
Hmm.
Oh, it's the CDC. A year ago, I would have said the CDC is going to tell me the truth. Now I don't know if the CDC is telling me the truth, so I better find something else that says the same thing. It was really interesting to feel like, how do we even know? I mean, we always knew that we had to corroborate our stories and our sources, but now it's like, oh my gosh, how are we going to know what's true anymore?
You say it was it's very interesting, and I think the interesting is
It's terrifying,
is carrying a lot of
actually.
weight.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's
it's really
terrifying.
quite scary, actually. Like how it's so. I mean, I know people keep saying this. It's so Orwellian, but it really is like, your eyes and your ears, and especially in this most recent event in Minneapolis, and like there's documentary evidence. But even before the body is cold, there's this flood of lies about what happened. And, but people, if you trust authorities, you're going to say, well, obviously they wouldn't lie, you know?
Hmm.
But then you've got the video. I mean,
Well,
we're
and
living
then
in a
you
very
contrast
strange
it
world.
with Ashley Babbitt because it was on the 7th, right?
It was was it the 7th? Yeah, it was. Oh,
So the
God.
day after January 6th,
Right.
where
Yeah, yeah,
Ashley
yeah.
Babbitt was killed for not complying.
Right. Right. Uh, what a mess. Anyway.
Yeah.
But Civil
If
War feels very, it feels like a great field and also a terrible field. Some days I feel
mm,
today like I know too much.
mm.
You probably
Yeah.
feel it like, oh, I've been here before.
Well, and that was something that when I read through your book, I put in the margin when I got to the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus material because I kind of felt that. And Holt kind of signed off on this, and Holt kind of helps with sort of legal justifications. Holt is the guy that kind of helps craft the legal case against Van
Sure.
Landingham, Milligan, and like so many other, even
Yep.
civilians during this
Yep.
conflict. And sort of,
Yep.
I kind of was wondering now that you wrote the book
Yeah.
during a very different time, like
Yeah.
looking at it today. How do you like feel about what Holt did in the 1860s, particularly in relation to today's time?
Yeah. That's a good question. I th what would I how would I answer that? I mean, I think I might answer it differently as a
Take it however you
historian.
want.
Well, I'm thinking I might say one thing as a historian and something else as a citizen. You know,
Hmm.
that as a citizen I would say, God, they were overreaching or they
Hmm.
were repressive, and maybe overly repressive. I do understand that in war you can't have total chaos. I think even as a citizen I understand that, and you do need to have, yeah, I don't know. But as a historian, I can see it all seems clear to me why they would take these steps. But as a citizen, I think I would feel like, man. On the other hand, it also makes a difference who the authority is, I guess. And I just feel so
Mm.
little, personally, so little respect and trust for our current authorities. I just but maybe I would have felt that way in the 1860s too. I don't know. I was in New York. I grew up in New York, and New York wasn't particularly loyal. So,
Well, but I kind of just also was thinking in terms of like the precedent that it sets, right? Of like,
yeah.
I
Yeah.
I just declare I kind of decide that between New York and Philadelphia or in the state of Ohio, I need martial law because there's chaos, so I'm just gonna do that, and then I
Right.
prosecute people, like
Right.
it 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 makes sense in the time
It
and the
does.
situation, but it's
Yeah.
also that it's something that's now on the books that if I feel that I need to do that, I can do that and I can prosecute. And one of the greatest presidents of the United States,
Right.
right, is sort of signing off on all of this. And
Right.
like that was sort of one
Well, yeah,
thing.
and the whole military, like, do you do a military trial or do you do a
Right.
civilian
Right.
trial, like with the assassination conspirators insisting on it being a military commission as opposed to a civilian trial? Although I do remember learning, that I do remember reading, I can't remember the name of the book, but another assassination scholar who, emphatically made the point that it really doesn't matter in terms of the results. The
Mm.
results would have been the same in that context. In that context, they would have been convicted. Doesn't matter. We're in 1865, in the summer of 1865. But it's an interesting question. Why so insistent on the military commission, except for control, which, obviously felt like everything was going out of control. So I can understand the impetus to do it that way, but I can also understand the argument that they should have gone through a civilian trial.
And when was Milligan? Milligan?
64, isn't it 64? Is that right?
I think so.
I
Because
think
that one
it's
is
April of,
getting,
for some reason I'm thinking April of 64, but I'm not up on my Milligan
66.
details.
Yeah, I thought it was under
66?
Johnson. Milligan, yeah.
well, it goes to the Supreme Court in 66, right?
Ah, yeah,
Wasn't he
that's right.
arrested
It
in
was
Yeah.
1864. Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
arrested in Indianapolis in October '64.
yeah,
Yeah.
October. Right,
But
right.
it's because, and that's a fascinating one because it's Van Laningham versus Milligan, right? Of course, it's like the Supreme Court rules in Milligan after the war and feels much more confident and like, okay, we can actually say what we mean and what we think is
Right.
the right. Versus Van Laningham of like, well, we don't say what Lincoln wants. Lincoln's just going to ignore it and do it anyways.
Yeah.
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 And,
I often think it would be this is a different issue, but I so often have been asked, what if Lincoln had lived? How
hmm.
different would things be? And
I was going to
I
ask you,
Million
do
always,
dollar
you
question.
think Holt would have made a good Supreme Court justice?
oh, yeah, I've never really thought about that. I think he might have been. He would have been pretty tough, though. um, yeah, I don't know. He would have been,
Well, but compared to the 1850s, I mean,
Hmm.
yeah. Yeah, well, he would have been better than Tawny, I would think.
Ah, well, that's a low bar.
A very low bar. Better than John Roberts. That's also a low bar as far as I'm concerned. But with regard to Lincoln, if he had lived, would he have been, handled Reconstruction better? And I think there's little question he would have handled it better. I Whatever that means. But one of my favorite things in my Civil War classes was to, as we got towards the end of the semester, to take a day of class and just say, okay, so the war is over. What are the problems that need to be solved? Just take a piece of chalk and write it on the board. Just write one. And inevitably, we would have like two big blackboards in the room, and you could fill both blackboards and you could have filled three or four more blackboards because there's so many things that need to be resolved in the wake of as the war is coming to an end and once it's ended. And it's just such a good indicator of how difficult Reconstruction was. And I think Lincoln would have done better. I think he would not have allowed, he wouldn't have so readily allowed white planters, to
yeah.
be resurgent. He would have slapped them down hard, I think. But I think we would not remember him so favorably as we do
Yeah,
now,
because it got
either.
cut down at
Because
the
he
at the
would have
height of his.
been, yeah, he died. I used to say literally something like, apart from the fact that, he was dead, he got off Reconstruction pretty easily because he didn't have to manage it. And so his reputation was not destroyed by whatever mistakes and terrible things he would have had to, live through or do or decide or whatever. So I think we would not remember him in the same way that we do
Well,
now. because it
it
would have
reminds me of
battered him the way who could manage that mess, you know?
it reminds me of, of a Seinfeld episode where George is having meetings with his group of colleagues and boss. Jerry tells him to go out with a bang, so he goes out with a bang every time because if he stays after his big joke, it's all downhill from there. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Lincoln, yeah, I don't know. Would have been very difficult. It was a terrible thing. On the other hand, Holt and I would say Butler too were among the not enough people who were saying we have got to make what just happened have lasting meaning. We
meaningful.
have to use this moment effectively to make some really big changes. And because that did not happen, I think it's a crucial component of why we are where we are
Yeah,
today. You
Yeah, but
know, that,
it's go ahead. Sorry.
well, no, I was just, going to say another version of that same thing. Reconstruction was not completed, and the changes that maybe could have been made
Mm.
were not made, and the moment was lost.
It doesn't
And
remind me though, being in Europe now, and I think this speaks for Andrew and me in both cases, me living in Germany, he living in France, but then the British too would be right after the First World War, generation dead, and the attitude that emerges is let's never do that ever again,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like the the national trauma is just so massive,
yeah,
unprecedented on some levels that I'm not excusing it. I'm just saying you can see how people are like, let's just move on.
yeah,
Let's kind of forget what happened or kind of people drawing the wrong lessons from it.
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I
It's
wonder
pretty.
how you could, I would just wonder how it could have been both, a period of healing. Maybe it just is impossible to have both
Mm.
a period of healing, but also a period of reconciliation. I mean, there needed to be something done to get
Are,
Black Americans standing on
are,
their feet and
are there
protected.
Well, Niels, your book on the Civil War and the Age of Nationalism. I mean, are there other examples in the 19th century or the early 20th century of a country being devastated by a civil war and being able to reconcile and reckon with what had just happened?
Now, I mean, from what I can think of right now, like every time you have sort of these, like even if there is an effort of some sort to kind of figure out a reconciliation by the late 19th century, usually you're gonna have your diehards, and it like I'm just thinking of like the borderland I'm living in right now, Schleswig-Holstein, right? Like today, it's like the story of this reconciliation of the kind of European Union in its perfect shape, the kind of cross-cultural experience. But you look at its history, it's just everything out, everything butts out. And you look at some of the nationalists still, I think there is still like the histories of these two countries very much divergent. The story is still very much like Danish nationalism and no, we don't touch nationalism in Germany. So it's very divergent. So I don't think ever that you have a reconciliation. Um, and like see United, like sure, Holt, I felt like you did a great job. Like Holt was never in the favor of reconciliation. Like that was just not on his mind.
No.
But when it really came to reconciliation, no one really wanted it unless it was on Southern terms or Northern terms. It
It
just
was
never,
either or.
yeah, yeah. There was
Yeah.
no, in many ways, then it became the Southern, right? Like this is the
Right.
way we go.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Poor Thaddeus Stevens, another
Oh,
person we,
jeez.
who wanted to stick the landing and did not
Mhm.
get to do that.
Well,
I think he needs some new work done on him. And the other person I have said to several people, I hope somebody will really take on Adelbert Ames, Butler's son-in-law,
mm,
who was a great Reconstruction governor and
mm. This
fiercely
was
devoted
Mississippi,
to his
right? Yeah.
fiercely devoted to his father-in-law and the cause, and also, and really, really could be, I mean, he's a wonderful, fascinating figure. I
Mm.
think I won't be doing the book, but somebody else should. He deserves a good
You're about
treatment.
done with your dissertation, right, Andrew?
I did go to, so Butler has his tombstone is in this family, the Hildreth family cemetery outside of Lowell, Massachusetts, where his wife's family had a big plot. And I did go to a birthday celebration for Butler there a few years ago, and was really fun. One of the fun things of being a biographer is that you sometimes know more than the living family descendants do because you've read all this stuff about the past. And I remember wandering through this graveyard and recognizing, oh, there's so and so. Oh, there's the baby that died. Oh, there's this, there's that. It was really fun. But Butler's tombstone, which I had seen in photographs, I had no idea how huge it is. It's like, I'm just trying to remember, 12 feet tall. I mean, it's enormous. And his son-in-law, Ames, Adelbert Ames, has one. It's a matching tombstone, and it's the same size. And I always think, oh, you guys, size doesn't matter. Do you not know? But it's like I want to be just like my father-in-law, and it's another huge stone. But it's a very interesting thing, which is also true. Holt has an interesting little graveyard outside of his old property, and they have, in fact, done a lot of work on that family home, the Holt house out there in Kentucky, since I wrote the biography, and have brought it back to some semblance of its old life, although it's the person that's managing, well, there are competing forces managing the restoration of the Holt home. So one of them is very ahistorical and just romantic and a little bit woo, and
Oof.
yeah, and so yeah, but she's competing with somebody who's really trying to do a good job. So it's been
Hmm.
interesting seeing that story that develop. But
So,
it's much nicer. I don't know if you remember that I went there with the descendants of his brother back in
hmm,
2009 or whatever it was. And I still keep in touch with them. I never developed that kind of relationship with any Butler descendants, but
hmm.
these two old women that I met in Kentucky and we traveled around together, we still stay in touch. I just had an email from one of them the other day. Very
Wow.
sweet. And that was something I wanted to show you as show and tell. One of the most lovely gifts I ever got, they sent me a spoon from
A
Joseph
spoon.
Holt's silver service.
Wow.
And it says Holt. I don't know if you can, yeah, it says
Hmm.
J. Holt on the, he had a,
Oh.
isn't that, isn't, it's a treasure. Isn't that the sweetest thing?
I have to say, I thought you were going to say Ben Butler.
No, if I had known family members, I would have kissed up to them too, but I never got to know family members the way I did these two wonderful descendants of his brother,
Hmm.
who was the slave, Thomas. It's his brother Thomas, who was a staunch, bitter slaveholder, and but they grew up as his descendants, and by the time they were growing up, my Joseph Holt was the hero of their family, and their father was named after him, and their grandfather was,
Hmm.
no, their brother was named after him, and they were the repository of the treasures of Joseph Holt, including his silver set. I
Hmm.
think they also have a pistol of his, but I've never seen the pistol.
Hmm.
Well, with Butler, you wouldn't have tried to try, wouldn't have been able to trust where that silver came from. So,
So they say, although he once said to, as I think I wrote in the book, these little girls that were saying, "Did you really steal all that silver?" And he said, people keep saying that about me, and I have been, this sounds very Trumpy actually, but he said, I've been investigated more than anybody else in the whole world. And, if I had stolen that, it would have been found. And anyway,
but I guess it would have been Holt that it would have investigated Butler.
probably. Well, I don't think they would have been good friends except maybe after, the assassination stuff had died down because, um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, Butler was pretty, I think they probably would have just grated on each other. Probably both very prickly, strong-minded men. I don't know. But I like to imagine them chatting over the garden wall there on New Jersey Avenue and rolling their eyes about, oh, that Andrew Johnson. What are we going to do with him? Oh, he's dead, thank God.
It did feel like that, right? Or like, oh my,
Yeah.
and then he came back from the grave. It just seemed like Holt couldn't escape anything in later
No, and
life.
he clung to it too. I mean, he was hard for him
Mm,
to let stuff go. It was kind of surprising actually that he did, surprising and sweet that he did actually reconcile in many ways with his family members, at least with some of
mm,
the descendants, and built this nice graveyard for the family, and so he there was some reconciliation there, and the book about. So this one, it is really an interesting comparison. This book didn't get much press, but it was one of the more interesting projects I ever did, and it looks at Holt and the slaves from the Holt family
mm,
property and how their trajectories were different during this Civil War, and not just how a bunch of the Holt family slaves went and fought for the Union and what it was like for them versus for Holt up there in Washington doing his thing and the rest of the white family doing their thing, but also it studies because it grew out of a research project I was doing with a student, a black student who wanted to study her family history. And I said, let's do it together. I'll study my family history, you study your family history. And we saw how difficult it was for her to get past 1870
mm,
into the past. And for me, I could go back to the 1700s, the 1600s. I could just keep going back, and I have
mm,
all this stuff from my family, and so it's also about the challenges of doing Black history versus doing, or the history of enslaved people and their descendants versus someone like Holt who left us buckets and buckets and trunk loads full of paperwork and stuff. So
mm.
it's kind of an interesting study there.
I'm gonna
And
give
I
it over
still
to.
remember discovering, so there was I had encountered in writing his biography this slave named Sandy. And I don't know if you've ever used Fold3, the
Mm.
database Fold3. And when I found Sandy's carded service record on
Mm.
Fold3, and he lists as his owner Thomas Holt of
Mm,
Stephensport, Kentucky, not in his own writing, but obviously somebody wrote it down for. Yeah, I was running up and down the halls of my where I worked, and I thought only historians would understand
Mm.
the excitement of that moment of like, I found the thing, I found the connection, I found the connection. So,
Mm.
wow, Andrew, you've been so quiet. So come on.
Yeah, it's been a great talk, and I don't have anything really else to ask or any comments to make.
well, I
Well,
hope
you're
I haven't
writing.
babbled too much.
You're writing a
No,
dissertation on Andrew Johnson, so in Tennessee.
yeah, but
So
I
you.
mean, since it's been a while since I've really gotten to it, so yeah,
Did you
health
come
wise.
to like Johnson at all? What did you how do you feel about him?
There are things that I can appreciate about him.
Yeah.
Um, uh, there are things that I think he had considerable personal values that are unfortunately, I don't know, pushed aside when he becomes president. And then he switches teams and his legacy is destroyed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, yes, until Lincoln's assassination, I think there's an Andrew Johnson that, if we take him at his word and we look at how the public sees him, uh, yeah, he's a pretty good guy. But then once he becomes president, everything changes.
Well,
So
he
my
stayed in the
opinion,
Union against all
he
odds.
did. I mean, and yeah, he really had. He had a hard time, and he was put right in the right in the crucible. I mean, he was
Yeah.
in it from the start, and yeah. So yes, I do appreciate quite a few aspects of him, um, but lots of things need to be taken with a grain of salt. And then obviously his legacy is something totally different.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that we don't remember the wartime Johnson as much.
For once, we
Or
only remember after the war,
yeah,
as opposed to, yeah.
and I think that a lot of um, the historiography of Johnson has been kind of tainted by the legacy. So we
Yeah.
don't look objectively at what he did from 1860 to 1864.
Is it Bergeron? Is that the name of the person who, one of his
Yeah,
biographers?
yeah,
Because I wrote a review of that, I remember, and I had such problems with that book because I felt like I could understand that he was trying to, in some ways, and this is really ancient history for me, but that I remembered that to me, he was trying to redeem Johnson, which I didn't. Obviously, I don't have a problem trying to redeem people who have been condemned by, their detractors, but it felt like he didn't ever, like he would say things, as I recall, like, well, but you got to give him credit for having strong positions. And I thought,
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah,
That's not good enough for me. It's one thing if but I could see how you could try to describe, like what you were saying, the places where he did have strengths and did make good contributions, but also say, and then, he changed teams, or things happened, and he lost his footing or whatever, and you could bring him back to, or reshape his legacy a little bit without
yeah. And that's
going so far to the other side. And that's how I remember feeling about that book. I just remember being incredibly frustrated with that book and like, what are you excusing here? You have to
well,
say it in some other way.
my thesis looks at the his public image
Hmm.
from the early secession period, so late 1850s Buchanan, through his death, and then the the creation of the national park or the national
Uh-huh.
cemetery. Um, but yeah, it's one of these stories as well that Johnson was a progressive Democrat for Tennessee in the 1850s, um, compared to his conservative colleagues. And then he becomes intransigent with the secessionists, and that pushes him into a more radical position. But then I think I wonder to what degree his shift over the course of the war to accepting emancipation, um, pushing for emancipation in Tennessee, um, and eventually accepting black soldiers, was not a calculated plan to make himself more popular in the North. So
Mm. Mm.
I have issues, and I'm not sure exactly how trustworthy he is with
Yeah.
the positive things that may come out of his character
Yeah.
during the war.
It's interesting too. I, for some reason, was just thinking how, back to this conversation we had earlier, like explaining things to people today that you sort of have to understand then to really understand. And I was thinking about him being chosen to be Lincoln's vice president,
What
which,
is that me?
people today might say,
Is
well,
that
why
me?
didn't he vet him more, or why didn't, after he, if he met him, but isn't it true they only met like after he had been, after the fact, and they met once before Lincoln was killed? And, I mean, it's like a completely different process. So to blame Lincoln for his foolishness and choosing, you got to go back there and understand how things were done in that time period. Is that
Well,
correct?
well, and then if you go to the Andrew Johnson homestead in Greenville, Tennessee, they give a very different story of the link between Lincoln and Johnson. I mean, because there was a family link, because it was Lincoln's uncle or cousin who married them.
Oh, okay.
I think I got that right. Um, in Greenville, because he lived in Greenville, and so the rest of his family went to Kentucky. His brother went to Kentucky, Lincoln's father. So But according to the established version of the narrative at the Andrew Johnson site, at least as of 2017, they were very close and they knew each other for a long time. So when Lincoln said, "Oh, Andrew Johnson, he's not a drunk," um, after the inauguration, that was apparently from years of knowing each other.
For goodness sake.
So
Did you ever see any evidence? You're the person to ask of Butler being on a short list to become vice president.
and I have no idea. I have no idea.
That story has circulated and circulated and circulated. And people ask me, and I say, no, no, no. I've never seen any evidence. And I'll tell you where the evidence would be Butler crowing about it in his 1,200 page long autobiography, because he crows about himself all the time and he never mentions it. But somehow, this story of Butler being shortlisted to become the vice president and turning Lincoln down because he felt like, well, and I think, I don't know where these things get started.
It doesn't work that way. It didn't work that way.
No, but it's like an old story. I mean, it's been out there for quite some time, and people
No, I don't know.
still ask me about that, and I'm like, the person you should ask is Butler himself, and he never mentions it, and you better be sure he would mention it, and he doesn't. So therefore, it did not happen
Well,
because
yeah,
he
but the
crows about everything. Doesn't mean it did happen if he does mention it, but
right, but yeah,
yeah,
but the whole National Union Convention in '64 is just really murky. I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, interesting.
So
Well, I guess I could now pose the question and be like, well, at the start or early in the conversation, I said, well, maybe we need to reevaluate Buchanan, and you guys seem to be like, maybe we need to reevaluate Johnson too.
Sounds like it. Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah,
yes and no for Johnson,
Yes and no.
in my humble opinion.
yeah. Well, sounds like you know
There
what you're
are
talking.
two Johnsons.
Yeah,
That's the thing. And Johnson didn't start the problem. He just didn't finish it well.
yeah,
He
yeah.
didn't find a reasonable solution.
And
But
there
A worker.
again, you wonder about an individual psychology. You wonder about what else is going on in their life. What causes people to lose their footing or, whatever. Who knows?
But look at the bust of Lincoln behind you with the no kings. Uh, that's Andrew Johnson as well.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a Lincoln Johnson tribute that you have behind you,
There you go.
even though it's memory.
Yeah. Well, I'll try to bite my tongue a little bit when I talk about Johnson. And now that we have this other
No, no, no,
guy,
no, 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 no.
no, he
Yeah,
was a terrible president,
he
but
was
he
a
is
terrible,
not as
terrible person.
terrible as our current president. So he has been bumped up.
I mean, at least he got what he got Alaska.
Yeah.
So now, so now, if the United States somehow gets Greenland,
Yeah.
oh my God.
Back in November, we had a Veterans Day um, event here, and somebody I know brought her grandfather's casket flag from World War II,
Oh my
and it
God.
was huge, like 9 feet. I mean, it was
Mhm.
enormous flag, and we just held it. And we had two veterans who were holding it. It was beautifully unfolded it. But as I was looking at it, I thought, oh my gosh, there's only 48 stars on it.
Hmm.
yeah,
And for some reason, that was like so. And nobody else noticed because it looks like, I mean, if you don't count them, you don't realize. And I was looking
well, I
at
mean,
it.
the pattern's a little different. You can,
It is, but anyway, it was very cool to see it. And I struggle with, the flag today, but for some reason, I actually brought a flag of the 20th Maine, and I brought a flag of the
oh,
U.S. in
real,
1860. Just a picture of them
oh,
because I said these are
Hmm.
the flags I feel comfortable waving today.
Hmm.
But that World War II flag, I had no trouble
Hmm.
feeling
yeah. I have
strongly about
two
it.
flags. I have two casket flags in my
Mm,
personal archives. I got one from a an uncle who was wounded and lost an eye in 1862, fighting
Yeah.
for an Indiana unit in Kentucky. So I have his casket flag, which was actually
Wow.
really small.
Huh.
It's a really small flag. And then I have a World War One flag from a great uncle
Oh,
who
wow.
was gassed at Chateau Thierry in France and ended up dying about 15 years later from the lungs being completely annihilated. So yeah, so I've got two flags and I'm very proud to have them
Yeah.
because they mean something different than the flag today. The flag today, the American flag today, is complicated.
It's much more complicated. And it is interesting. I know that I have many people who and my like inability to wave a flag, like many people when we're out protesting are waving a current flag and people say, "Do you want a flag?" And I'm like, "No, thanks. I'm
Mm.
fine." And then they think I don't they're surprised to hear that I'm not anti-military in like this global sense because I'm
Yeah,
always going to think about the soldiers in blue. I'm always going to think about
yeah,
there are soldiers who have done I'm going to think about those black veterans. There's just it's very easy when you don't know about the history of these things to, have these yeah, gut reactions to things. And yeah, the fact that I don't want to wave a modern day American flag from, the dollar store has really not, and I don't really want to say the Pledge of Allegiance either, which is like got its own
it
weird
sounds
history, you
false.
know? And I didn't grow up having to say it, but, other people, I don't know, I listen to people say it and I think, anyway, that's like a whole nother topic. But it doesn't have anything to do with not respecting the military. Civil War
Mm.
historians, we of all people, or war historians, we know. And when people say we just need to have peace, and I think, well, okay, it's not always possible.
Oh, the Peace Democrats, Vallandigham, and yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes, I mean, if human beings were a different species, maybe we could do that, but we're not. We are who we are, and we seem to not know how to do a lot of things without
well, and
coming to blows.
thanks to what you've written, we know more about two of those
Mm.
important people from the Civil War
Well,
era, Joseph Holt and Ben Butler.
yes. And all my women soldiers from
Yeah,
way back when and so on. Well,
I
this has
have
been
not read
great.
it.
Thank you. I have no idea how long we've been talking, but
I was just going to tell you, we are at almost an hour and 40 minutes.
oh my goodness. Well,
So it was
I
the
hope
hour
you got what you
15.
needed and I didn't babble on too much or give you overly long answers to your
No, it was
questions.
wonderful.
Oh,
Like
good.
it
Oh, we
was
had a
a
great
great
time.
free-flowing conversation that we had there.
Well, good. I really haven't done this kind of thing in quite some time, so I was a little anxious about being very like,
Well,
I
well,
don't even know what to say.
we
But I do
we
want
forgot
to
to.
also go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Well, we forgot to ask one question. Do you have anything you're working on now?
No, right now, I really feel like the Butler book was a great capstone, as I said. I have some questions. I'll tell you I have one lingering question. I think, well, if I ever got back into doing research, maybe I would look at this because it's kind of an interesting question. But I feel like my talents and the amount of energy I have and the amount of time I have at this point in my life, I'm going to be 69 on my next birthday, in our current environment. You all are out there doing the good work of Civil War history, and you don't need me doing it too. And I am much better off and just feel very compelled to be doing other things right now. But that
Yeah.
but if things ever become peaceful and sane again, and whatever, we return to something that looks like the country that I used to believe I lived in. A question that I think would be really interesting relates to the three black soldiers. I'm sorry, the three black enslaved men who went to Fort Monroe and asked to be protected by Benjamin Butler. 6 weeks, 4 weeks into the war, 6 weeks into the war. I think of them as like Rosa Parks won't sit, she won't stand up on the bus. And after that incident, who cares about Rosa Parks? Because all we talk about is Martin Luther King. And
Mm.
those three men came to Fort Monroe and they asked for protection. And then it opens up the door on Butler, Butler, Butler. what happened to them? And
Mm.
what happened to their families? And where did they, and what did it mean for them? I would love to be able to
Mm.
track down more of them. And in a semi-related topic, there was a one of the most fun things I've done in the past year of great, stress, anguish, and grief around, what's happening to our country is there was a former slave named Samuel Osborne who was brought to Colby College after the war by a Colby student or former student who had gone down to the South to the war. And he brought Samuel Osborne back with him. And Samuel Osborne became a janitor at Colby College and was worked there for 40 years and raised his whole black family in Waterville, 7 children.
Mm.
And he brought his father back. I'm sorry, my computer is making noise. And anyway, um, they were buried in a local cemetery,
Mm.
and nobody pays any attention to them anymore. And I found their graves, and we did a Juneteenth ceremony for them in town.
Mm.
And it was so lovely. The whole family is buried there, and it was really cool um, that they were buried right with the white community. They were not
Mm.
shoved into the potter's field. They were buried with, and on top of that, the local paper did a story about this family and a woman who is 100 years old saw the story in the paper, and said, "I knew them." And
Mm.
I was able to go over to her house with all of these materials that I had uncovered
Mm.
about this family and bring them to her house, and we were looking through them. It was very sweet. So what happened, those kinds of stories would interest me. I wouldn't mind doing a history of that family in Waterville
Mm.
too. Probably the first black family to ever live in Waterville. So so
Oh,
if,
okay.
Yeah.
if the times change and the tidal wave recedes and we all
Mm.
can, do what we want to do.
Mm.
Or I might just
It-
knit because
if you have free and fair elections in the next
yeah,
cycle.
right.
Oh, yeah, right.
Well, thank you very much for this
Yes.
opportunity. I appreciate it, and I wish you both all the best.
Thank you for taking so much time today to before you have some busy work tomorrow. To
Oh, and Niels, that was what I was going to say. The last thing I'll say is that you did send me questions after the Butler book came out, and they were very good questions. And I remember I wrote you quite, as good answers as I could come up with. And that question and answer thing became my sort of go-to review sheet
oh,
before I would give talks. I did
That's
have
cool.
notes, but I would read over a sort of basic lecture I had, and then I would say, okay, what were the questions that Niels asked me, and what did I say then? Do I still feel that's true? And it was such a great, so it was like 2 or 3 pages I printed off with these questions and answers, and I thought, oh yeah, those were good answers, and those were good questions, and it was really helpful to me. So I just
I,
wanted you to know that.
I think that's the first time I've ever heard somebody do that. So that's
Oh no,
wonderful to
it
know.
was really helpful. Yeah, it was really
Very
helpful.
good.
Good
Very
little cheat
good.
sheet for me. So I didn't have to read the book every time, again. Oh God, now I have to go read that book again. Because I had worked out those answers
6,000
in my
times.
It gets old fast, doesn't it?
mind. Well, you start thinking about other things and it sort of
Yeah.
recedes in your mind. So,
Yeah. No, I'm glad, and I hope this conversation will resonate with a lot of people as well, and sort of like what Holt, Butler, and the many others that you have studied in the past have achieved,
A
and
craft,
yeah,
an historian's craft.
yeah,
that's right.
we-
Right.
very much so. It's a craft that we are in.
And
Thank
it's hard
you.
work when people say, well, I'm not a rocket scientist, and I think, well, historians not. I mean, I'm not a rocket scientist either, but historians' work done well is not easy.
All right, that's the perfect final words.
Okay. Thank you.
Got it.
Thank you.
Hold on a second. Don't leave
Okay.
yet.